I'm trying to write a sequel to a novel series that I wrote several years ago. And I'm through 5 chapters and then a little bit into the 6th chapter and I'm blocked. What can you do? So what next? Geez. Chapter 1. It was tough to find a parking spot, and when Chris got to Bob's Donuts, there was a line. 10:30 on a weeknight, Chris said to the guy in front of him, "What's everyone doing?" "Bake times," the guy said. "Ah, something I should have known then," Chris said, whatever that meant. "I assume you're a regular?" The guy didn't answer, and Chris said, "I'm a local, mostly, but not a regular. I did used to come here after a Bond movie. Or before. You remember when they'd open at the Royal? Down the street?" The guy'd had enough of Chris, but another guy spoke up. "Those were the days, my friend. Always right near Christmas." "So you know," Chris said, turning around to the guy and his admittedly pretty voluptuous female friend. "I had a birthday then, too. One year, the one time I invite about 20 kids, it was sold out and we end up at a theater on Market Street watching something else." "Bummer," the guy said. "Which one was it?" his friend said. "That we missed? I think it was License to Kill. I could be mixed up. I was ticked off." "That must have been so disappointing," she said. Chris was thinking, well, it wasn't that bad. It was 6th grade. You got over it. But nice of her to be concerned. She said, "That's the one where he goes rogue." "I remember that," the guy said. "He gives up his 00 license and does it his way." "All about revenge," she said. "Was that like the first Timothy Dalton?" the guy said. "Pretty sure second one," she said. "You're thinking of the Living Daylights." "Oh, yeah," Chris and the guy both said. "She knows her movies," the guy said. "She watches him working out. She's very disciplined." "He tends to be too," she said. The original guy in front looked back like, "What are you doing in here stuffing your face with donuts at this hour if you all are so disciplined?" Chris had to agree, and one thing for sure, he himself had no discipline at the moment, and he had extreme weakness for glazed buttermilk bars, especially Bob's and especially fresh out of the deep fryer, which is why he tried to avoid the place when he was in town. And the line moved, and you could see them better on the cooling rack and maybe go for 2. Back outside, Polk Street had a decent vibe tonight. Not too many homeless, and you didn't otherwise feel like you were going to get mugged going back to your car, though these days in San Francisco, that part was unfortunately becoming a crapshoot. The movie guy took a big bite of something powdery with fruit inside. Not your best choice from in here, and got caught up in his phone. And Chris figured, what the hey, and discreetly handed the woman a business card from when he once worked for the Chronicle. But the number was still good, and you never know. Two, he'd been subletting the apartment on Broderick Street in the Marina and living in Manhattan Beach, and for the most part it worked out okay. There'd been the one tenant, tech guy from North Carolina who seemed normal but then turned on Chris, stopped paying the rent, and called the building department and threatened to sue him and so on. And Chris had to dangle him off the roof to equalize the situation, though things almost got away from Chris, and he dodged a bullet and thank God never heard from that guy again. There'd been a couple of tenants since. Everything fine, but the current ones asked if they could break the lease and move to Oregon. They were going to hemp farm up there, and did he mind them leaving some furniture in the apartment? Chris minded all of it, but didn't say anything and wished them well. He'd heard from a guy who tried it that the hemp business up there was oversaturated, but that guy did get stoned a lot, and why stick your nose in someone's dreams? So he'd been back in the apartment since yesterday, and the people's furniture actually helped. And soon enough, you go through the hassle of re-renting the place, but for now, a little change-up wasn't the worst thing. He flicked on the late news. They were in the middle of a live cam where the reporter was on a residential block, and there was police activity behind her and crime tape. The reporter said someone was found unresponsive around 8 o'clock, and foul play is suspected, and therefore the crime scene business. And the camera panned to the house, and Chris said, "Jesus Christ, I know that one." Now he listened carefully for more details, but there weren't any. So he changed channels a couple times, didn't get anywhere, tried the internet, zip so far. Wow. That was the Pomeroy brothers who lived there growing up. And as far as Chris knew, the family still owned the place. The Pomeroys were a wealthy old-time San Francisco family. They were in the society pages in Herb Caen's column. The dad had been part owner of the 49ers. The family set up a charity ice skating thing at the Cow Palace every Christmas, and everyone could borrow skates and skate for free. In fact, one year, that's where Chris got into it with the younger son Patrick when they were in high school and starting to have girlfriends, and there was some posturing and pushing and shoving, but nothing that lasted. The family was down to earth. The dad would sometimes stop by JK Playground when they were playing football, and he would quarterback for both teams, and he was athletic and had a big smile, the kind of parent you wanted. All that aside, something happened at their house tonight, and Chris decided it was going to be tough now to flick a switch and go to bed la-di-da. And he looked at his watch, and last call wasn't until 2, so he headed over to Weatherby's. When he walked in, some kids in back were singing a college drinking song, but otherwise it was reasonably quiet, and Mitch was polishing glasses. "Whoa-ho! My blood brother," Mitch said. "What the heck?" Chris said, "Anything on draft, please, works, and how are you back?" Mitch said, "Showing up out of the blue, no rhyme or reason, it keeps me off balance." He lowered his voice. "I tend to anticipate. I'm going to read about you in the papers, sooner or later. Sorry." "Nah, that's fine," Chris said. "You're playing the odds. I can't blame you." But only, I'm good. That department. At least I think I'm good." Mitch cleared his throat. "Well, whatever that means. And don't tell me. We can celebrate then." Chris's phone rang, and he put his hand up to excuse himself and went outside. "Just for my own edification," the woman from the donuts line was saying. "Do I what?" Chris said. "Correct. Do you force your little card on strangers? I mean, is that your M.O.? "For a while there, I was doing it worse," Chris said. "I see. A business one. How low class." "No, that's nothing," Chris said, "like I say. And you're not funny," she said. "I agree with that, but still." "I know. What the hell am I doing calling you back?" "No," Chris said, "you did the right thing. Don't overthink it. I'm actually right now in the marina at a place. So, yippee, I'm not going there." "Tonight, you mean," he said, "or ever?" She didn't say anything. Chris said, "Well, I like to walk in the mornings on the Marina Green. You can join me. It's nice and safe there." She said that's a reluctant possibility, but she likes to ride a bicycle instead. "There's that too," Chris said, and they left off It Might Happen. "So where were we?" Mitch said when Chris was back at the bar. "Sorry about that," Chris said. "That we can celebrate something you said, which is nuts. Forget that." Mitch went in the kitchen and brought him a slice of pecan pie, heated up nice with a touch of whipped cream, explaining there'd been an office party today and the people barely touched the desserts. God dang it, Chris said. There goes my diet. Part 2. What was part 1? Bob's, and not that long ago. Have to say, Mitch said, all that time it seemed like you're checking with me, do I look too thin? Now you're reversing on me? Good point, Chris said, compared to the alternative. I mean your white blood cell count and shit? No idea, Chris said. So you've still never got yourself checked back out? No. Well, partner, no harm, no foul, I guess then. Yeah, something like that. Listen, I've said it before, Mitch, but I mean it. Thanks for putting up with me. Okay, stop it. A different station was replaying the late news on the wall behind Mitch, and this time they had an SFPD cop out front saying something to a reporter. Chris unfortunately recognized him, the guy dropping by Broderick Street once and asking a couple of follow-up clarification questions on behalf of Detective Cousins from Rohnert Park. At least that was the SFPD cop's story. It was about a year ago now, so you had that. Maybe. Chris said to Mitch, you remember that gal Bethany? No clue. Okay, maybe I never got her here. I tried to lure her back to my apartment that time we went to New Joe's, but it didn't work. She lived in the Haight. You're rambling, Mitch said. Bethany was my doctor's front desk person. From when I got my alleged bad news, she went out with me a couple times because she felt sorry for me. Ah. Yeah. Anyway, she had this mope husband, X1. She claimed this dude was holding her back. You know. Maybe you did mention this, Mitch said. Have to admit, brother, you had a bit of a circus going on there for a while. The womanizing department couldn't necessarily keep it straight. I guess I did, Chris said. It's embarrassing to think. I was kind of like throwing mud at the wall like there's no tomorrow. See what stuck. Understandable, Mitch said. So she calls me a couple weeks ago in L.A. She sounds pretty wasted. I'm tempted to ask, are you working in a new medical facility and getting your hands on the stuff? More common than you think, Mitch said. I know someone that happened to. I don't ask, though. I just listened to her carry on. She said she tried to reconcile with her husband. Went down there expecting to. This is Arizona. But discovers the guy is screwing around not only on her now, but on his new wife that he's supposed to leave her for. Or that he's supposed to leave for her. Too complicated, bud. Especially at this hour. Sorry. Bottom line, she asked me, can I take care of the guy? She lets it linger. And it's clear, I think, what she's talking about. Huh. So why you? That's what I'm saying. For the next couple of days, I sort back through a whole bunch of stuff. I swear it's like I'm rerunning an episodic TV series. I'm thinking, what did I miss? And I know the answer, Mitch said. You got Zip. Chris said, how come you're so smart? Because you wouldn't be telling me this. So where are we at? No idea where we're at. Do I ask her for specifics? What gives her the notion that I'm a candidate to take care of this piece of garbage? Do I risk asking her, did I ever blurt something out in my sleep? Thought you said you didn't get to that point. Couple times, but don't worry about that. Or did she witness anything? Any clue? Or Jesus, did that son of a bitch Steiner suspect anything? Son of a bitch who? My doctor. Ah, shit. An old friend of mine from way back. Could he have read something in me? Fuck. And passed it on to his secretary? I don't think so. You don't? Nah, man. What's he going to read in you? How is that even possible? Second thing, is he an MD? Yeah. Okay, they're Hippocratic Code of Ethics or some shit. Doesn't mean anything, Chris said. Mitch said, you're starting to wobble off the deep end on me. You don't mind my saying. Oh. If your friend is going to pass on any wild suspicions, it's going to be to the police. Or to you directly. How about that? You would think, Chris said. Still pretty dang weird she posed it to me. Forget it. Unless you're, considering helping her? Mitch, are you nuts? Just checking. Good. I did speak to the guy once, for my own personal reasons, when I was in the area. Just a meeting of the minds, nothing to write home about. In fact, it backfired on me later. Not worth going into. So how'd you end it off? The phone call? Told her have a nice day and I'd buy her lunch she's ever in Manhattan Beach. She good with that? Not at all. If anything, she was more pissed off. Someone like that, I could see her taking the law in her own hands. I'm not kidding. 3. Chris slept in and thought about attempting his old run along the Marina Green to the bridge and back, but instead went for coffee and pastries at this new place on Chestnut. The run idea was ridiculous. Even if he survived it without pulling something, you'd pay the price later. A man had to accept his age and know his limitations, which is what he told the young guy at the table next to him on the sidewalk who was sweating like a dog and had obviously just done some heavy-duty workout. Really, the young guy said, you don't look that old. My dad, he's retired up in Grass Valley. He still runs. I see, Chris said. But the other side of the coin, the guy said, my buddy Alan, who I knew since middle school, he enters the half marathon last year and collapses at the 8-mile mark. I mean, really collapses. Defib, the whole 9 yards. Of course, they think long COVID might have been a factor, which he didn't even know he had. Sheesh, Chris said. He okay? He's fine, back at work, being careful. Guy does seem a little spacey here and there, but I could be imagining it. Looking for it, Chris said. I hear you. Chris remembered, which he didn't want to be, running the same route that time, the beginning leg of the half marathon, with the Demirco person trailing him. This guy had a Chronicle on his table, and Chris asked could he borrow the main news section. Certainly, the guy said, handing over the whole paper. It was here, not my thing. No, it wouldn't be, Chris was thinking. It was a foreign object, unless you were over 40 at least. Chris wasn't sure where you'd buy the physical paper anymore. Halfway down was the item from last night. Someone unresponsive and the police treating it as a crime. Nothing additional other than Upper Broadway being mentioned, which Chris knew already from recognizing the house. He'd sort of forgotten about it, hadn't checked the morning news or the computer for an update. Sorry to bother you, Chris said to the guy. You hear anything about a crime up the hill? Oh, yes, the guy said. That's a strange one, if it's what they're saying. What are they saying? Hard to follow. One account on Twitter, slightly different on KCBS. Wait, the radio? You listen to that? Only to get my traffic reports. Gee, traffic to where? You don't look like a heavy commuter, to be honest. Yeah, well, Santa Clara, the guy said. Chris was thinking 10:30 on a Wednesday morning, the dude looking pretty casual. Another example of it not being worth it to figure out the millennial generation. Chris said, strange one how? The guy said it was like a family dinner, they said, and someone got hit with a cleaver. Jesus. So that was fatal? No, that just got it started. At least that was Twitter. The radio said it was a cocktail party, and all they had was someone struck someone. Either way, what a mess. Holy smokes, Chris said. Well, thanks. You too, the guy said. Stay safe. And he got up and left. Chris pulled out his phone. He tried the Chronicle online for an update, but there was only one new piece of information, though it was an intense one. You had a deceased white female, the police said. Who the heck could that be? Chris was thinking. The Pomeroys had sisters who Chris never paid much attention to back then. The mom was sweet, God forbid. But it could have been a cocktail party like they said. The violent part, nothing to do with the family. Maybe. Chris figured take a look at Facebook. Possible someone from the old days posted something. Chris had a few of those old days Facebook friends who he didn't particularly want, but who found him. People going back to junior high and even grammar school. When someone discovered you and asked to be your friend, you had to have the obligatory private conversation with them as you asked each other about the last 30 years, and that typically took care of it. But then you were stuck with them for better or worse, and they occasionally interacted with you on the forum. There were 3 posts about it and some comments, but no one knew much. Chris remembered a "we grew up in San Francisco" type group, which someone asked him to join once, and he had zero interest and politely shut the person down, but now you may as well run it. And there it was up top, the incident and a name, unconfirmed, the poster said, but others chimed in that yes, that looks right. Katie McKenzie. Chris knew Katie from 7th grade on. Marina Middle School all the way through Lowell. At Berkeley, she was in his freshman dorm quad. Holy shit. Your first thought, what was she even doing there? Which, of course, was irrelevant. What was the difference? The poor thing was gone, unless you prayed the San Francisco group got it wrong, but it didn't feel that way. 4. More news came out the next couple days. Sadly, they confirmed it was Katie. Beyond that, the cops were tight-lipped. They announced they were seeking a person of interest and didn't say much more. A week went by. There was plenty of speculation in the media, but no one convinced you they knew anything for sure. On Saturday, Chris got together with the donut shop gal, Meredith. He met her on Marina Boulevard at the entrance to Crissy Field. "Just so you know," he said, "a major sacrifice on my part to bring my bike." "Yes, you've alluded to that," Meredith said. Meredith said, "You're a fan of jogging." "Sure. Is there a problem with that?" "This is my route, more or less." "Which you did today," she said. "No. I suspended the activity. Saved my energy for this." "Well," she said, "it's a clear sky, not much wind. I thought we'd ride to Ocean Beach." "Jesus," Chris said. "Baker Beach I can see, maybe. But all the way out there, are you sure? Come on. And you're turning out to be wimpier than you pretended to be at Bob's Donuts when you talked tough to Mel." Chris didn't remember talking tough to anyone that time, but Meredith locked into her pedals and took off, and decent pace on the woman, he had to say. There was an event in progress at the main base as they cut through the Presidio, near a flagpole, and Chris hoped it wasn't some memorial. But people seemed to be in good moods and laughing. "Can you tell what's going on?" Meredith said. "No need," Chris said. "We're in the Presidio. There's always stuff. You remember when this place was an army base? Or before your time?" "Before yours too," she said. "Or," he said, "we can circle around in here. Plenty of territory. Eucalyptus groves, sandy soil, little lanes. The last remnant of old San Francisco the way it was before they developed the shit out of it. The miles add up. And it's safer." Someone chimed in. "I hear you," this guy said. He and his female companion were straddling bikes as well. "Traffic risk is more minimal in here," he said. "As long as you stay off the thoroughfares," the woman said. "Right," the guy said, "meaning Arguello and Washington Boulevard. We've made that mistake. They get narrow on you. Everything else decent." Fine, I'll take your word for it, Chris said, but I was thinking the kind of safety where you don't get armed robbed as easy, which is fashionable these days. Oh, the guy said, well, maybe that too. Surprising that's so high on his list, Meredith said to the couple. He claims he's a native San Franciscan. You'd think he'd be more comfortable in it. Why is it safer here, the woman said. They'd introduced themselves as Fred and Valerie. Thank you for asking, Chris said. See, now the bad guys, they're not comfortable in the woods for starters. Acorns on the roads, confusing how to get out of here. Ah, Fred said. They come from Bayview and Oakland and Richmond, Chris continued, even Fairfield and Vacaville. Gangs up there too now. Quite a sweeping generalization, Meredith said, so you're a racist as well. No, I see where he's coming from, Valerie said. Car crimes being more in the comfort zone of today's criminal. Exactly, right in their wheelhouse, Chris said, even on the way to Ocean Beach. Relatively safe neighborhoods, but these guys can cruise up on you out of the blue, pick you off, and they disappear fast on California or Geary. So back to the Western Addition or Bayview or Hunters Point unimpeded, Valerie said. Especially if they time the stoplights, you're saying, Fred said. Right, or switch vehicles, Chris said. The one they picked you off in being typically a stolen one and some type SUV. My gosh, you're an alarmist, Meredith said to Chris. And you too, I'm afraid, to Valerie. They kind of are, Fred said. We're riding bikes here. We have a postcard day. Everything's cool. What's the big issue? Chris kept his mouth shut, and the other three decided yes, Ocean Beach was a good idea. And he went along, and no one robbed anyone, and the worst thing that happened was a homeless guy out by the Cliff House got mad at Chris when he only gave the guy $1, and the guy wanted more. Chris thinking, why do I keep getting in trouble when Meredith and their two new friends rode right past this guy? 5. No criminal incidents occurred on the way back either. It was getting close to cocktail hour. Chris wasn't sure how he felt about Meredith, but he was enjoying this other couple. He said, well, I got a blender at my place on Broderick Street. Furnishing's a little sparse at the moment, but what's everyone thinking? Fred looked at Valerie and told Chris, that sounds great. And when they got there, Chris opened the garage door and said, we can all leave our bikes here for safekeeping. And where are you parked anyway? We're not, Fred said. We live in Marin. Valerie nodded. We rode over the bridge. Oh, Chris said, but you wait until now to tell us? I mean, you were slinging your local opinions around there with authority, like you were in the middle of it. Would have to agree, Meredith said, and Chris realized he didn't know for sure where she lived either, even though they met at Bob's on Polk. But let's don't worry about this stuff, Chris said, pointing upstairs. Let me work on the refreshments. And they went up there. It's nice here, Valerie said, sitting back on the couch and putting her feet up. Fred and Meredith agreed it was. It reminded Chris of Allison that night, and Joyce unfortunately downstairs in the alcove with something urgent on her mind. Seemed like a long time ago. Plenty of water and mixed adventures under the bridge since. Cut me off if I'm butting in, Fred said. But what's a pad like this run you these days? I'm around 17, Chris said. I've been here a while, which is why I hang on to it. Once I leave, be tough to get back in the city. Marin sounds nice, Meredith said. My boyfriend and I, we go back and forth on moving. She has a boyfriend, Chris explained. He didn't know if she really did, certainly didn't expect her to blurt it out, but here you were. Well, Fred said, normally I'd pretend I didn't absorb that, but this daiquiri, dang tasty and nice and strong, by the way, has me curious. How it works, Meredith said. Well, yes, hon, Valerie said. I'm not sure, Meredith said. Chris here, he moved in like in broad daylight, Kind of how you used to cut a dance in high school? And you admired his moxie, Valerie said. Could be, Meredith said, but more like curiosity. The fact is, I'm not sure I like Chris. Mutual, Chris said. Fred laughed. You guys are something else. Seriously, for real? Shifting the spectrum on you, Chris said. What's an apartment in Marin County run? A 2-bedroom type deal. Doesn't have to be fancy. Well, funny you ask, Fred said. Our place, a couple of weeks ago, we checked out an open house, the unit downstairs. What do they want, hun? $29.50? Geez, Chris said. I know, right? Valerie said. And that was a 1. The 2s, I believe, run around $3,500 currently. Whereabouts over there? Meredith said. We're in Mill Valley, she said. We've never tried to buy. We're career renters, I'm afraid. Which is a dumb move, of course, Fred said. No equity cash out. Chris said, yeah, maybe, but a lot simpler. Less risky, less headaches, and more flexibility, Meredith said. My boyfriend and me, we've lived in 11 states. Is that right? Chris said. Well, why don't you invite him? Seemed like a decent fellow. Here, you mean? I was thinking Eduardo's on Union, Chris said. Used to be on Chestnut Street. They disappeared, and you figure that's it, but they're making a comeback. Fred and Valerie admitted, well, they were pretty hungry, and Meredith said, okay, whatever. And she didn't invite the boyfriend guy, and they walked over to Fillmore and up to Union. See, now this type place, Chris explained once they got settled in, Eduardo's, every neighborhood used to have one. Simple cuisine, brought over from the homeland via North Beach and the Wharf, and not screwed around with. Except with Union Street prices, Meredith said. You know something, Chris said? You're kind of a downer. When I do the inviting, I pay for the table. No discussion. Sure, Fred said. I mean, we just met. Valerie smiled. We'll order light then, she said. And Chris said, don't be ridiculous. Order big. He's had a couple wake-up calls the last few years. You set your priorities different. How so? Meredith said. I had an unfavorable diagnosis, Chris said. You might as well lay it on the table, he was thinking, the tame part. Rounding it off, it was 1.5 years now plus. So whatever. My lord, Valerie said. At first I was like, yeah, Chris said. Then it turned out they made a mistake. Which, he was thinking, seemed increasingly the truth, but still you prayed every day it was. Thank God then, Fred said. I mean, you look great. I agree, Meredith said, working her wine, and Chris could feel, whoa, maybe it's happening. You never know. So, Chris said, digging into the homemade gnocchi, which they changed slightly from the Chestnut Street version, but was still good. Where are you folks from, originally? Me, Yonkers, New York, Valerie said. Fortunately, we moved to Philadelphia when I was 13 and I escaped. Geez, Yonkers, Chris said, remembering dealing with the guy whose name he'd blocked out now on behalf of Ned. How strange, your reaction, Meredith said. I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Fred said. We met at IU. That didn't work, but we ran into each other again at a spring training baseball game. Then we got out of Scottsdale before global warming amped up, Valerie explained, my second escape. Chris was thinking, too much weird karma here. They keep reintroducing locations on me. How about you, he said to Meredith, before the 11-state business. Butte County, she said. Is that, whatchamacall? Chico, Fred said. Meredith nodded, and there you had it, the hat trick. The portions were decent, and everyone dug in pretty good, though Chris was still hungry and ordered mixed desserts for the table and coffee. Fred and Valerie and Meredith insisted, ooh, they never drink coffee at night, it screws them up. And Chris said, suit yourself, and figured they'd come around, and they all did. You folks remind me of my cousin from New Orleans, Chris said. He's always telling you how he never does stuff, but the whole time he's explaining to you that, he's making the exception. Does wash down the tiramisu beautifully, Fred said. This is a quality restaurant, and you're a darn good host. Valerie nodded. Not where we expected to end up, this circumstance, when we set off this morning. I agree, Meredith said, and to Chris, I'm thinking I'll go back to your place after all. Jesus, Fred said. I mean, sorry, none of my business, obviously. No, that's fine, Chris said. Listen, everyone feel like stretching the legs a little when we get out of here? There's a house up the hill I wouldn't mind taking a look at. All three said they were game, and Chris figured, yeah, the caffeine never hurt, and they walked to Divisadero and turned onto the real steep stretch where there were steps built into the sidewalks in case you needed them. At Divisadero and Broadway, you had the 3-block stretch. When Chris was growing up, a bunch of fancy houses you didn't pay attention to when he and his friends were cutting through on the way into the Presidio. But now they called it the Gold Coast, and tourists and tour buses showed up and looked around. At the end of the 3 blocks, where it dead-ended at the Presidio gate, were the Lion Street steps, with a commanding view of the bay and bridge as you descended into the Marina District. There were various billionaires and celebrities reportedly living on the Gold Coast, and there were listings and maps for the tourists, similar to Chris remembering checking out where the movie stars lived in Beverly Hills once on vacation with his parents. Chris said to Fred, Valerie, and Meredith, okay, now the thing we have, there was a crime in one of these, still unsolved. You might have heard about it, unfortunately. Oh my gosh, Valerie said, certainly. So this is where you're telling us. Dang, Fred said. I didn't even make the connection. Which house exactly? Do you know? I do, Chris said, and he pointed to it. North side of Broadway, a third of the block between Baker and Lyon. Different paint scheme than when he was there as a kid. The front yard contained by a security fence now, though a tasteful wrought iron one with spikes on top. The whole shebang out of 19th century France, though Chris was guessing that part. Well, you must know something, Meredith said, seeing how you're a native and all. Chris knew it was dumb to think ahead, but if it happened to get to the bedroom stage with Meredith, she was shaping up to be one obnoxious piranha fish, wasn't she? 6. What am I supposed to know? Chris said. Enough to drag us up here, I'd say, Meredith said. Have to admit that's a fair point, Valerie said. Fred said, cops pretty tight-lipped, huh? What's it been, a few weeks? You have to wonder, this neighborhood and all, are they protecting someone? Oh boy, Valerie said, and to Chris and Meredith, this is what happens when you spend too much time on the internet. Everything's a conspiracy. Not everything, Fred said, but yes, it's been known to happen. I hear you, Meredith said. So now what? What now? I had an unfavorable diagnosis, Chris said. You might as well lay it on the table, he was thinking, the tame part. Rounding it off, it was 1.5 years now plus. So whatever. My lord, Valerie said. At first I was like, yeah, Chris said. Then it turned out they made a mistake. Which he was thinking seemed increasingly the truth, but still you prayed every day it was. Thank God then, Fred said. I mean, you look great. I agree, Meredith said, working her wine, and Chris could feel, whoa, maybe it's happening. You never know. So, Chris said, digging into the homemade gnocchi, which they changed slightly from the Chestnut Street version, but was still good. Where are you folks from, originally? Me, Yonkers, New York, Valerie said. Fortunately, we moved to Philadelphia when I was 13 and I escaped. Geez, Yonkers, Chris said, remembering dealing with the guy whose name he'd blocked out now on behalf of Ned. How strange. Your reaction. Meredith said. I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Fred said. We met at IU. That didn't work, but we ran into each other again at a spring training baseball game. Then we got out of Scottsdale before global warming amped up, Valerie explained, my second escape. Chris was thinking, too much weird karma here. They keep reintroducing locations on me. How about you, he said to Meredith, before the 11 state business. Butte County, she said. Is that whatchamacall? Chico, Fred said. Meredith nodded, and there you had it, the hat trick. The portions were decent, and everyone dug in pretty good, though Chris was still hungry and ordered mixed desserts for the table and coffee. Fred and Valerie and Meredith insisted, they never drink coffee at night, it screws them up, and Chris said, suit yourself, and figured they'd come around, and they all did. You folks remind me of my cousin from New Orleans, Chris said. He's always telling you how he never does stuff, but the whole time he's explaining to you that, he's making the exception. Does wash down the tiramisu beautifully, Fred said. This is a quality restaurant, and you're a darn good host. Valerie nodded. Not where we expected to end up, this circumstance, when we set off this morning. I agree, Meredith said, and to Chris, I'm thinking I'll go back to your place after all. Jesus, Fred said. Sorry, none of my business, obviously. No, that's fine, Chris said. Listen, everyone feel like stretching the legs a little when we get out of here? There's a house up the hill I wouldn't mind taking a look at. All three said they were game, and Chris figured, the caffeine never hurt, and they walked to Divisadero and turned onto the real steep stretch where there were steps built into the sidewalks in case you needed them. At Divisadero and Broadway, you had the 3-block stretch. When Chris was growing up, a bunch of fancy houses you didn't pay attention to when he and his friends were cutting through on the way into the Presidio. But now they called it the Gold Coast, and tourists and tour buses showed up and looked around. At the end of the 3 blocks, where it dead-ended at the Presidio gate, were the Lion Street steps, with a commanding view of the bay and bridge as you descended into the Marina District. There were various billionaires and celebrities reportedly living on the Gold Coast, and there were listings and maps for the tourists, similar to Chris remembering checking out where the movie stars lived in Beverly Hills once on vacation with his parents. Chris said to Fred, Valerie, and Meredith, okay, now the thing we have, there was a crime in one of these, still unsolved. You might have heard about it, unfortunately. Oh my gosh, Valerie said, certainly. So this is where you're telling us. Dang, Fred said. I didn't even make the connection. Which house exactly? Do you know? I do, Chris said, and he pointed to it. North side of Broadway, a third of the block between Baker and Lyon. Different paint scheme than when he was there as a kid. The front yard contained by a security fence now, though a tasteful wrought iron one with spikes on top. The whole shebang out of 19th century France, though Chris was guessing that part. Well, you must know something, Meredith said, seeing how you're a native and all. Chris knew it was dumb to think ahead, but if it happened to get to the bedroom stage with Meredith, she was shaping up to be one obnoxious piranha fish, wasn't she? 6. What am I supposed to know? Chris said. Enough to drag us up here, I'd say, Meredith said. Have to admit that's a fair point, Valerie said. Fred said, Cops pretty tight-lipped, huh? What's it been, a few weeks? You have to wonder, this neighborhood and all, are they protecting someone? Oh boy, Valerie said, and to Chris and Meredith, this is what happens when you spend too much time on the internet. Everything's a conspiracy. Not everything, Fred said, but yes, it's been known to happen. I hear you, Meredith said. So now what? What now? To be one obnoxious piranha fish, wasn't she? 6. What am I supposed to know? Chris said. Enough to drag us up here, I'd say, Meredith said. Have to admit that's a fair point, Valerie said. Fred said, Cops pretty tight-lipped, huh? What's it been, a few weeks? You have to wonder, this neighborhood and all, are they protecting someone? Oh boy, Valerie said, and to Chris and Meredith, this is what happens when you spend too much time on the internet. Everything's a conspiracy. Not everything, Fred said, but yes, it's been known to happen. I hear you, Meredith said. So now what? What now? So now what? What now?